Hello everyone! I've got my Christmas decorations, I've got my Christmas sweater, and I have my second cup of cocoa that I've had today. I'm ready to talk about the best books I read in 2017. I've also had a little bit of a cough and a cold the past week, so if my voice sounds different, that's why. So as always with my favorite books of the year, these are not necessarily books released in 2017, but the books that I've read in 2017, and they are pretty much in order of when I read them. First on the list is the March graphic novel series by John Lewis. I started this graphic novel series not too long after the inauguration on January 20th. So they had extra importance and meaning as I read them in the context of who was getting inaugurated. This graphic novel series is set in the civil rights era and follows Representative John Lewis as he got into protesting and working with Martin Luther King Jr. to promote peaceful resistance. It covers a lot of really dramatic events, and it also ties in scenes of Barack Obama's inauguration. So it was really beautifully told, and the art was really beautiful too. And I recommend this series to anyone and everyone. Next on the list is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I finally gave in to all the hype about this series and read the first book, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it had a really great tone and mood to it, and I loved learning about the characters' lives as little kids and growing older and seeing how they changed and how their relationship changed, and I definitely want to continue on with the series. I also really would love to travel to Italy someday, so I enjoyed reading a book set in Italy. Third on the list is Sherman Alexie's memoir, You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, and I read this over the summer and I really enjoyed it. I've read most of what Sherman Alexie has written, and I love his writing and his storytelling, and this memoir was beautifully written in a combination of poems and prose that wove together really beautifully. His memoir focuses on his relationship with his mother, who passed away, I think, a few years ago. Next on the list is a very similar book thematically, which is Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is another memoir that also focuses very heavily on a mother-son relationship. And I found a lot of similarities in the two memoirs about being of a minority race in a country where white people have infiltrated and decimated the culture, and they also both talked about language and the intersection of white culture versus their own culture. Born a Crime I listened to on audiobook because it was free on Audible at one point, and Trevor Noah has one of the most beautiful voices that I have ever heard, so it was a really enjoyable listening experience as well. Next on the list is another comic, and that is Monstrous Volume 2. This is written by Marjorie M. Liu and illustrated by Sana Takeda, and it is seriously the most gorgeous graphic novel or comics illustration that I have ever seen. It just suits everything I like about what can be done with visual art. The story is also really interesting, and the characters are all very diverse, and there is a lot of female power in this series. Another one of my favorite books this year are more comics by Kate Beaton. I read Step Aside Pops this year, which is her second book in the Harker Vagrant collection, and I just really love her humor, and my favorite part of this book was the retelling of Wuthering Heights, and she only made it through I think the first half of the book, but I can't wait to see more because it's hilarious. Even though Wuthering Heights is my favorite book of all time, I am totally down for any and all parodies that make fun of it. If you don't follow Kate Beaton on Twitter, you definitely should, because she posts a lot of comics about her family, and right now she's been posting a lot about her and her sister who has been diagnosed with cancer. So even though there's a lot of funny stuff, there's also a lot of really deep meaning to her work as well. You may notice that so far I haven't included any of the big books that I've read in 2017, but the next one was one of them, and that is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I absolutely loved this story, and even though it took a long time to get through, it was all very enjoyable and so worth it at the end. There is a lot of detail to this world, but it makes you feel like you are there and experiencing it, and it makes it feel so real even though it is a fantasy story. I have now seen the miniseries and really enjoyed that as well. I thought they really did it justice, even though of course the book is better. Next on my list is yet another graphic novel. This one is Thornhill by Pam Smyth, and this is one that I saw at the library and read right around Halloween, which was perfect because it's a very spooky, mysterious tale about two girls living in different times but are still somehow connected. And the story does get a little dark, but I absolutely loved it and I really enjoyed the art as well. And for my next one on the list is yet another, at least partial, graphic novel, and that is The Marvels by Brian Selznick. When I read one of his books, it's always in my top books of the year because I absolutely love his art and just the experience of the story as a whole. And this, of course, is an absolutely gorgeous cover. And this one is set up a little differently from his previous two books in this style that go back and forth between just pictures and just text. This one is told the first half all pictures, and then the second half is mostly just text until the very end when it gets back to more pictures. And all of his drawings are in graphite, which is one of my personal favorite drawing methods. His stories are also always connected to the arts in some way, which I love, so I just love everything about his books. The next book on my list has also made my top favorite books of all time list, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I had a sneaking suspicion that this would be a new favorite all-time book, and it definitely was. It's absolutely beautifully written. The first chapter is just so good and potentially my favorite chapter of all time, and I will definitely be rereading this in the future. For those of you who are familiar with the plot, you might know that Jane Eyre has some similar thematic elements to it, and I'm actually rereading Jane Eyre right now, and I'm really enjoying it and also definitely picking up on some of those similarities. And the last one on my list is the last big book that I read this year, and that is Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials series. So this has The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. And it was the first time that I've read this series or consumed anything related to this series, and I really enjoyed it. My favorite book out of the three was the first one, and then the third one was my second favorite. And I just loved the originality to the first story, and although of course many elements are taken from previous fantasy stories, it still felt like something that I had never encountered before. I really loved getting to know Lyra and exploring Oxford with her, and then exploring the wider world as she learns more about it herself. I've heard that the BBC is producing a mini-series of this, so I will probably skip watching the movie of The Golden Compass that's already out there and just wait for the mini-series, because they will probably, from what I've heard, do a better job of representing this story. So those are all my favorite books that I've read in 2017. I didn't mention star ratings because they're all 5-star books for me. There are technically 11 items on the list, but the first and last one all have 3 parts or 3 books to them. So really I think there's 15 on the list. which is really not too bad. Looking back over the course of the year, I think it was a really good reading year. I also just wanted to talk a little bit about my stats for the year and the reading goals that I had. I had set my book challenge to 50 books, which is a very reachable goal for me, and I actually ended up reading 66 books. I might finish maybe one or two more by the end of the year, but nothing that I think will show up on my favorites list. And as I've mentioned many times, my main reading goal for the year was to read all my big books. And if you saw my last video, you know how many are still left. And I ended up reading 10 big books off of my shelves, which I think is definitely an accomplishment. And I'm really glad that I took this project on, and I'm also really glad that I can leave it for at least a couple years. And maybe sometime in the distant future, I'll take another year to finish off all the rest. But for now, I'll be moving on to other things. One interesting statistic that I found from my reading this year is that I read 0 sci-fi books. All of the other genres that I have on my reading spreadsheet, I read at least one, if not many more than that, but no sci-fi. There were a couple sci-fi-ish stories in the fantasy anthology that I read, but on its own, no sci-fi, which was interesting. So maybe I will try to read a little bit more of that in the next couple years. For male authors versus female authors, I read 31 male authors and 34 female. 33 of the books were from authors from the United States, 3 from Canada, 16 from the United Kingdom, 2 from India, 3 from Japan, which I think is mainly the life-changing magic of tidying up books that I read this year, and then 1 or 2 of several other countries, including Dominican Republic, Norden, Italy, Australia, South Africa, Nigeria, and Russia. And as far as diversity goes for the books themselves, it's broken up into a few different categories. So there's race-based, LGBTQIA, mental illness, author only, where only the author is diverse, hashtag own voices, where the author is telling the story of their own people, not including white people, of course, and then none. There's a couple other categories that I didn't fit any of my books into, so 39 books were in the none category, where nothing was really diverse. 10 books were race-based, diverse, and 11 books were in the hashtag own voices. And 1 or 2 were in the other categories that I mentioned. So a total of 32% were diverse under the categories of race or own voices, which I think is better than I've done before. So that's how that went. For the original languages that the books were written in, 92% were written in English. 1 was translated from Italian, 3 from Japanese, and 1 from Russian. My average star rating for the whole year was 4.05, and I read 5.5 books on average every month. The total number of pages I have read is 21,061, and it will be a few hundred more than that by the end of the year once I mark Jane Eyre as completed, and that is an average of 58 pages per day. I also did not finish or DNF'd 3 books, and I would really like to make a video just about books that I DNF'd on Goodreads. So the spreadsheet that I used in 2017 was the Let's Read spreadsheet, which I will link down below if you are interested. I don't think I'll be using it for 2018 because I will be doubling my reading goal, and I don't really feel like taking the time to track it all on the spreadsheet and on Goodreads. I will definitely still track everything on Goodreads. So that is everything for this video. If you are interested in learning about my 2018 goals, I will link that at the end of the video. I hope you've all had a wonderful reading year and that you have a wonderful reading year in 2018. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next year.